Scientists discover hidden temple in a buried Roman city using ground-penetrating radar. A great amount of our human history gets tucked away and sits unnoticed for centuries. It's an exciting feat to learn and uncover more and more, but the sad truth is that there are many things that we just might never track down. Recently, we took a step in the right direction. A temple that had been concealed by time was discovered in an ancient Roman city. The temple once stood in the city of Falerii Novi. The temple is largely underground still. Archaeologists managed to map the town out in an impressive and truly tremendous amount of detail. They used GPR or ground-penetrating radar to uncover structures that had not been known of before now in the city. They uncovered plenty, revealing to us a temple and a bathing complex we had been oblivious to prior to this. Falerii Novi was founded in 242 BC and can be found approximately 31 miles north of Rome. This small city rests in what is now a rural area, free of modern buildings, preserving it in time. So far, the city has been partially excavated, with this new GPR map showing high-resolution scans that can provide a great detail of valuable data without the immediate need for an excavation. The GPR mapping has shown some of the construction processes as well as the impact of evolution and time in the preservation and in the development of materials and methods. Co-author of the study, Martin Millett, is a professor of classical archaeology at the University of Cambridge in the UK. He explained in an interview with Live Science that the ground-penetrating radar technique is revolutionary, meaning that research teams do not have to focus on minor details while trying to gather a big picture, but that they can now look at entire towns, forming a comprehensive idea of a city, a place or a culture without being limited to largely excavated areas to do so, such as Pompeii. Archaeologists began excavation at the site back in the 19th century, with it not being identified as Falerii Novi until later on. This identification was only made possible by the number of historical records found that described the Roman city. It was then in the late 1990s that the research into this site took another step further, with researchers carrying out magnetic surveys. This measured the patterns in soil magnetism to visualize buried structures. At the time, this technique was a good option, though the low resolution resulted in a fuzzy picture not clear enough to make distinct decisions and conclusions. This new study has a far higher resolution, penetrating the ground to map this out. Not only was a temple uncovered, but researchers revealed a bizarre water supply system made up of crossing pipes that did not run parallel to the city, an unusual quirk. The team have suggested that this might imply that the pipes were laid before the buildings, giving us a glimpse into the Roman construction processes. The development of our skills and technology is truly fascinating, that with the advancement of the available equipment, taking another look just a few decades later can reveal a whole new host of information. Oldest pyramids found in Brazil. When we think of pyramids, for most of us, they are confined to ancient Egypt, or at least that is what we might initially think of. Archaeologists uncovered what we still believe to be the oldest pyramids we know of back in 1996. Just off the Atlantic coast of southern Brazil lies a series of ancient pyramids, seemingly built as part of a religious practice, much like those we know a bit more about in Egypt and in Mexico. Within them, experts have uncovered hundreds of remains, telling us more about human burial practices. Much like many who were laid to rest within pyramids, the deceased have been sent off into the afterlife well prepared, with several different items accompanying them within these very grand graves. Some of the artifacts uncovered by the archaeological team includes stone plaques, shell breastplates, and small models crafted from stone of birds, fish, and whales, amongst a few other animals. We can see here that there is a great deal of similarity between the pyramids built in Egypt and those seen in Brazil, with them acting as a place to lay the deceased to rest with a grand send-off. Despite their function being somewhat the same, it's important to remember that at the time the pyramids were constructed, there was no communication between the two countries, no way for one community to see the practices of the other, and that the idea of pyramids was nearly simultaneously yet independently constructed. This is certainly a coincidence worth exploring further. The Brazilian pyramids have been found to date back to 3000 BC, meaning that the oldest Brazilian pyramids are a few centuries older than those we see in Egypt. While it's true that these pyramids had a striking resemblance in function to those we know of in Egypt and elsewhere, their execution was vastly different. We can see that the construction of the pyramids differs drastically, with those in Brazil being built in a number of phased stages, with one pyramid's build stretching over lifetimes, taking decades or sometimes even centuries to complete. Egyptian pyramids, on the other hand, were built in one swift undertaking. Yes, it was a long process, but it was completed in one marked effort. The biggest difference is not the time scale of this building project, but rather the construction materials. We are all familiar with the stone look of the Egyptian pyramids taking on a classic and iconic appearance. The concept of a pyramid does not end there, and is certainly not so confined, with the Brazilian pyramids being built solely out of seashells. This less than usual construction material forms part of why archaeologists glazed over precisely what these structures are for so long. Many Brazilian prehistorians simply saw them as impressively large piles of domestic rubbish left behind by various settlements, never quite realizing what a feat that lay before them. Research that was looking at delving into the so-called ancient rubbish is what led the team to realize what it was they were looking at. The square structures on the ground space and the somewhat tapered tops did resemble the pyramid design that we are used to. The initial research conducted revealed that some of the structures spanned 37 acres and reached a staggering 160 feet in height, all made from seashells. This makes the volume of these structures significantly larger than those young pyramids seen in Egypt, and their height is not too far off either. Due to the lack of conservation effort, it is estimated that we only have 10% of the structures surviving, all of which are in their own various stages of decay. Archaeologists have hypothesized that there were originally around 1,000 Brazilian pyramids, some of them reaching back to 5,000 years old. It was between 1920 and 1960 that these pyramids suffered a true setback in their state of preservation. Several of the pyramids were used as resources, taking the shells as a means to aid road construction and gather other raw materials. One of the largest remaining Brazilian pyramids can be seen near the town of Jaguaruna, in Santa Catarina. This is 100 feet high and spans 25 acres, but it is said to have once stood 65 feet taller. Some research even indicates that, not dislike Mexican pyramids, the pyramids seen in Brazil also saw structures on top of them. It's truly fascinating to see how millennia apart, different communities were conducting similar practices and rituals in the name of culture, tradition, and faith. It's a shame to see how history gets lost in translation, with once grand and proud structures being viewed by a modern audience as piles of rubbish. A melting glacier reveals a World War I shelter and artifacts in the Italian Alps. Finding leftover artifacts from the tragic days of World War I is not unusual for Europeans, but it can certainly be frightening as the most common type of findings tend to be unexploded devices in marshes. The Italian Alps are a beautiful place, but for over a century they have concealed a moment in time frozen in front of our very eyes, keeping the time of the First World Conflict halted as the world developed and advanced around it. On a fateful day in November 1918, Austrian soldiers left their mountain station on the Italian Mount Scoluzzo, only for an icy glacier to form over the cave's entrance, trapping all the items inside. The glacier is beginning to melt, and as a result, scientists have found countless pieces of memorabilia from the time of the conflict stashed away beneath the icy exterior of the cave. Archaeologists and historians were aware of the cave prior to its melting, but because of the thick ice, they could not get through it until 2017, when the ice began to melt and thinned enough to allow them to enter and explore the cave and its contents. By now, the entire excavation has been fully conducted, and archaeologists uncovered a plethora of things, from frozen food products, straw mattresses, utensils, jackets made of animal skins, and period-based newspapers. This little cave revealed in full what life was like for the soldiers in 1918, or at the very least, for those soldiers who fought upon the mountainside. Stefano Morosini stated that the artifacts are a representation, like a time machine, of the extreme conditions of life during the First World War. The group of Austrian soldiers was about 20 men in size, and they lived in the cave with an altitude of 10,151 feet in the air. Survival itself was a struggle, not to mention having to fight alongside the harsh environments. In the winter, the temperature of the Italian Alps could drop as far as -40 degrees. There is an overwhelming likelihood that the majority of the soldiers sent up to the Alps perished from hypothermia or avalanches, which can also be common during the winter, instead of passing away in actual conflict. Stefano Morosini added, soldiers had to fight against the extreme environment, fight against the snow or the avalanches, but also fight against the enemy. The fighting in the Alps is now romantically known as the White War, and has had several poems written about it, glamorizing it, especially during the early 20th century. The battle lasted for 3.5 years until the Austrian soldiers retreated from Mount Scoluzzo. Countless individuals are spread across the mountain's range. Marco Ghizzoni, one of the archaeologists who excavated the glacier cave and a worker at the Museum of the White War, said, "A corpse is found every 2 or 3 years, usually in places where there was fighting on the glacier." Hikers in 2020 came across a chilling sight of a frozen corpse of a soldier, with several other individuals found in the Alps within the last few years. And yet, despite the extraordinary discovery of this time capsule, it brings with it worries of global warming. But what do you make of these recent discoveries? Be sure to let us know your thoughts in the comment section below and help us grow this community while working to solve these unexplained mysteries. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more videos.